Hey, how's it going YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pub Stomp MTG, and in this video today I'll be discussing another Final Fantasy commander that is coming out pretty soon in the summer, and that's Emet-Selch Unsundered. And this is one crazy powerful commander that focuses on a graveyard strategy. But before I dive any further, make sure to check out my links down below. If you are looking for any of these cards, I do have a TCG player affiliate link. I also have my link to my Discord if you want to join a great community. And not only that, I do have a Patreon if you want to support my work even further. So definitely go check those out. But getting back into the video with Emet-Selch Unsundered, this is one fantastic commander that I'm excited to talk about, and so let's get it started. So first I want to read this commander and kind of follow up with a question. So Emet-Selch Unsundered for 1 blue and a black, so 3 mana total, for a 2/4 body. It's a legendary creature elder wizard with vigilance. When it enters or attacks, you draw a card, then discard a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Emet-Selch. Then when you transform it, you have Hades, Sorcerer of Eld, which is a legendary creature avatar with a 6/6 body, and it also has vigilance and Echoes of the Lost. During your turn, you may play cards from your graveyard. If a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So there's a lot of reasons to like this commander, but what gravitates you towards it? Is it the looting style effect when it attacks or enters the battlefield, or is it because you could transform it into a Yawgmoth's Will on the backside, casting spells from your graveyard? So if this is a commander that you're intrigued by and want to build around, this video is absolutely for you. So I will be discussing graveyard synergies. I will also focus on a little bit of reanimation and of course some win cons in this deck. And so now with that said, let's get started with graveyard synergies. And I feel like there's a lot of components you need to have in this deck. Of course, your commander itself is a discard outlet so that you can put big giant scary creatures in your graveyard, but there are a ton of other ways because of course you're only going to be looting basically once each turn, whether you're entering the battlefield or attacking with your commander. So we absolutely want to fill the graveyard, so eventually we could flip into the other side and cast spells for free essentially. So some of my favorite ways of filling up my graveyard are using simple effects like Ripples of a Death. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards, then you may pay 1 and 3 life if you do put a card from among those cards into your hand. So this is pretty sticky on the battlefield. It's an enchantment. There's not a lot of removal besides white and green that can remove enchantments. Not only that, Ripples of a Death will help you mill a lot of cards. 3 each turn is going to be huge. And if you want to keep one of those cards, you can absolutely do so by paying 1 and 3 life, put it in your hand. This is just a great simple effective way of recurable options of putting cards in your graveyard. If you do have this on the battlefield, I wouldn't cast your commander immediately, especially if you're filling your graveyard a lot, because if you flip it over into the backside, all those cards you mill with Ripples of Death or other options can be more of a downside because those will get exiled with that commander's ability. So that's just a little bit of a warning. But going back into some self-mill, I love Millikin because it's a mana rock, and also you can mill 1 card, especially being a Dimir deck, you need all the ramp you could get, and milling a card along the process is pretty great too. I would also recommend a lot of looters that just tap, you draw a card and discard a card. The more of these options you have, the better you will be off. For example, Likeness Looter, Vohar, or even Rona, where you just draw a card then discard a card. Each of these are pretty critical. If you don't have your commander out on the battlefield, you could just get started by looting ahead of time. And not only that, they each have abilities that are pretty useful outside of just being a looting effect. If you want other ways to put cards into your graveyard, specific ones you need at a specific moment, Orc Lore Mage is an excellent choice because it has a tap ability. Search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. It will boost itself up if it is an instant or sorcery, but if you want to take it a step further, one that I personally like a little bit more, Gravebreaker Lamia is an excellent choice because it's an entomb effect when it enters the battlefield, and it does have lifelink that might come up a lot where your life total is pretty low. You could swing and gain some life, but most importantly with our commander, if we flip it into the other side, we might want to cast a lot of spells. They will be reduced based off its ability. Spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So again, I can't recommend this card enough. I think it's perfect for the deck. But if there's one card I can't recommend enough, and I recommend this in all my Reanimator decks, and that's Palantir of Orthanc. I feel like every time I do a Reanimator deck on my channel, I always mention this card, but seriously, it's so powerful. You could either draw a card, or depending on what your opponent chooses, you can mill cards depending on how much influence counters you have, and then you get to deal damage equal to the mana cost of cards you milled that way. This is just one excellent card. I love using it in a lot of different strategies. It gives one opponent a tough choice to either giving you card draw, or in other cases, they get a lot of damage dealt to them. Most likely, a lot of people are picking the card draw option when they see how much damage they are taking, especially in this kind of deck where we have a lot of big targets. This is just a fine, excellent choice. Again, I can't can't recommend it enough in any reanimator strategy. But since I talked about big scary threats, I wanted to move on and talk about some reanimator targets. And I feel like a lot of them are going to help synergize with our strategy. For example, Doom Whisperer is an excellent choice. You pay 2 life to reveal 2. We're putting cards into our graveyard indefinitely with this guy. As the old saying goes, we use our life as a resource in Commander because we have 40 life. This will definitely accelerate our game plan to another level, putting a lot of cards in our graveyard. Then later when we have the opposite side of our Commander on the battlefield, we get to just play all the spells from our graveyard almost as if it's our hand. Another card that absolutely synergizes with our Commander is Lord of the Forsaken, mainly for that last ability. You pay 1 life, add a colorless mana, spend this mana only to cast a spell from your graveyard. So again, going back to that saying, life is just a resource, we get mana off of this casting spells from our graveyard. It is colorless mana, so it's a little bit more limited, but I think that's completely worth it, especially knowing with Hades, Sorcerer of Eld, we're casting spells from our graveyard. This will help us get extra mana in order to do so. And not only that, sometimes we might want to have Hades off the battlefield so that we can mill more cards and have a filled graveyard again. So this can be a sacrifice outlet and to mill 3 cards. So if there's any other card to recommend, this is definitely one of the better ones in my opinion. Another fun option in a self-mill strategy would be Angel of Suffering. If damage would be dealt to you, prevent that damage and mill twice that many cards. If we do have Hades out on the battlefield, we'll exile all those cards that are milled, so that might not be the right strategy. So we might want to have our Commander on the command zone, at least for a little while, until we have enough cards milled, and then we might want to get rid of the Angel of Suffering, because we'll exile a ton of cards, and we definitely don't want to do that. And most of the time, we are going to be discarding cards, so why not take advantage of Archfiend of Ifnir? I've been throwing this in a lot of different decks. I actually threw this in my Sauron the Dark Lord deck, because whenever you cycle or discard another card, you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. This is absolutely brutal, mostly because they're -1/-1 counters. They're not until in a turn, they're permanent, and if you have a lot of those looting effects, you're going to be discarding a ton of cards, which means you're essentially going to be board wiping the board or making your opponent's creatures a little bit smaller each time. Another fun reanimation target that I just kind of throw into any kind of deck is Archon of Cruelty. This is more of a modern card, but I love it in Commander. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. So this will provide you card advantage, gaining life. Of course, we are going to be probably losing a lot of life off of some of the effects we have, so this can be essential in getting that life up again. But not only that, we're pretty much hosing one opponent if that opponent's ahead, or if they screwed you in some sort of way and you're salty about it. Archon of Cruelty can definitely punish them that way. And these are some examples of great reanimation targets. There's a ton of others like Valgavoth Terror Eater that you can cast your opponent's spells when they go to the graveyard. You also have Villus Broker of Blood. When you're losing life, you draw that many cards. That's pretty insane. Or if you want to control the board a little bit, Hullbreaker Horror can be absolutely brutal. When you're casting spells, you bounce spells to their opponent's hands or bounce cards from the battlefield to their hand too. There's a lot of brutal ways of using some reanimator targets like these. But now I wanted to focus on some of the win cons you could include in your deck. Most likely it's going to be a beatdown plan with a lot of these big giant creatures, but there are some potential ways you could win the game. If you like losing friends and you want to play the game by yourself, you could use a near infinite combo with your commander on the battlefield flipped as Hades, Displacerkin, and an extra turn spell. It is pretty simple how this works. You'll just cast that extra turn spell, and if it's from your graveyard, that's still completely fine. Displacerkin will trigger, flickering Hades into the front side with Emmet, and then because the extra turn spell's still on the stack, it'll just go to the graveyard, not in exile, because you flipped Hades into Emmet. And then you go to your next turn, you flip Emmet into Hades, cast that extra turn spell, Displacerkin will flicker Hades into Emmet, and then you get an extra turn spell, and you kind of do this over and over again until you have near infinite turns. The reason why I say that is because you're going to be looting each time with Emmet entering the battlefield, but in those infinite turns, you essentially fill your graveyard with your whole entire deck, and you could win with like a Laboratory Maniac or Thassa's Oracle. Of course, this is more of a degenerate way of winning, but if you are playing into that bracket level 3, 4, or 5, I think this could be a good fit because of course with bracket 3, I believe it's only 3 game changers and Thassa's Oracle is a game changer. You could switch it to Lab Man if you want to make it a little bit more fair, but not by much honestly. So yeah, I was kind of surprised as I was researching there is an infinite combo with this commander, but it doesn't surprise me in the same way. You need to have 14 or more cards in your graveyard in order to flip Hades each time, which again is pretty easy to do. But now with all that said, that is going to do it for me guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Emet-Selch and on the backside Hades. When I first read this card, I thought Greek mythology was in Final Fantasy. However, when I was talking about the spoilers about a couple weeks ago, some people mentioned that it's just a separate thing, which completely makes sense by the way. But I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts and opinions about this commander? Do you plan on building yourself? What other strategies would you follow along the process of building this commander? To me, I think this is pretty strong. Having a Yawgmoth's Well on the backside isn't too shabby, and having a looter on the front side can be pretty useful. well. They definitely go hand in hand. So again, extremely strong, and I can see this being pretty popular from the set. So if you can, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.